Most welcome to Heidegger 859. We are presently at this lovely pond up in a park, and we are well bestowed with sunshine today, but at the same time there's a cold wind blowing. I think this is an apt as moment as ever to speak about the little and the big, and that is quite a concern. The debate within philosophy has been raging for millennia, whether it's the particular or whether it's the universal, and who should be the winner of this competition. Well, it's hard to say. But in the beginning there were more nominalists than universalists, and in the end universalism was the winner, the victor. This is not as an easy subject as it sounds, and my point of the argument is rather not accepting neither points, thereby implying they are both oversimplification and also questioning the very, so to speak, method or underlying picture of reality to leads to these different conceptions of reality. Is it really true that a generalization in that coarse way could lead one to a deeper knowledge of reality? What is the process of universalization? It is something that Paul Feyerabend brought to the subject many times in his book Conquest of Abundance. He shows how this tendency sort of comes and goes in history and eventually wins. And one of the first instances he takes up is in late Roman Empire, where a simplification takes place within sculpting and statue making. All of a sudden all statues becomes more generalized and do not show in the same manner personal features. This is also the time when even in Roman areas one begins to start questioning personal features among the gods. One tries to make them more general somehow, and also when it comes to building structures, architecture, there is an oversimplification, and I would say there is an obvious lack of skill there. And I think that's more of a hinting point than speak only about universals without getting into how they could be constructed. It's not a matter of an opinion here, it's more how do you construct that opinion, or how do you construct that reality? Are you being careful, or are you sort of pointing with the whole hand? I would say that there is definitely in this case a pointing of the whole hand in effect, and that universals constructed in a sound way do not construct in that way. And that is rather just taking away our features, and what you end up with is a sort of reduced thing by taking away everything that sticks out, everything that is not part of the generalized picture, you get some sort of overlap. And this overlap doesn't seem to contain any knowledge to speak of. It takes away the knowledge. And by generalizing too much, the individual features disappears, and this also seems to be something that is good, something that is appreciated. I would argue rather look at the discoveries within mathematics. Fractality, for instance. Fractality shows that the complexity adds on. And that way of constructing a universal is rather an overlaying of complexity that finally leads something to something that is more complex than the particular. So actually in this very thing it's quite a lot different. How can you add fractality to fractality? Well, you just add to complexity and you get this wholeness that contains a lot more. And once more we strand with this idea of law of the excluded middle. There seems to be a contradiction that stops thinking in the universalist claim. And that's the idea. We have to take away feature. We have to sort of whitewash all particular to get to a universal. Nothing else is possible. If we, for instance, want to have, this is an actual example coming from Bertrand Russell. If you want to have the set of all apples, you want to have the property of being an apple or being red or something. Bertrand Russell saw it as, here it is impossible. All the properties of the different apples can participate in the property. Think of a set, put all the apples in the set. They constitute a property of being apple. And that property is more purified, so to speak, whitewashed. It's a pure apple. It could not be done in any other fashion, according to Bertrand Russell, because if all the different things like red and green apples would be conjoining to make up the universal, the apple, the different aspects would sort of contradict each other, like a red apple contradicts a green apple or so forth. So you can see how the law of the excluded middle also plays a role here. They need to be all the same. And in this perceived or wished for sameness, you end up with a pure apple property. Just by saying so, I see something really problematic. I would say that's incredibly problematic in itself. One question one could ask here: what on earth is left of the property apple if you take away everything that's individual? Can something be individual and a universal at the same time? Bertrand Russell and everyone else until the event of deconstruction, dialetheism and fractal geometry would say no, but after that we can actually be at liberty of saying yes, and a resounding yes, because the Bertrand Russell concept is so crippled, so handicapped, and it defies thinking. It doesn't make sense even. So all of a sudden this battle going on between universalists and nominalists end up somewhere completely different, unexpected, that we add up the shapes to make something bigger. And this may sound like something, it's interesting, but it doesn't play a high role. I would say it plays an immense role in everyday life and how we gather knowledge. If we read something or we acquire some knowledge, if it's whitewashed, it would be ridden by all the different fractal differences within the particulars, and we will end up with a whitewashed universals, and that whitewashed universal doesn't have any weight to it. Let me give you an example from something I've been thinking about myself since an early age. I got a map one Christmas, a huge map my father put on a piece of plywood, and it covered most of my bedroom. And I became fascinated with countries, and I learned the different countries and their capitals by heart. I thought it was a fun thing to do. But I was fascinated with the borders, and later I came to read that borders and nations as such is a new concept, and it somewhat started with Enlightenment, or maybe a French Revolution, and a bit after that, the idea that vaguely something, one culture, one nation, one language, common borders and common areas became something. And this is actually called the Rise of Nationalism. That is a proper name. And first, when I read this, I heard about this, and I was start thinking, these nations I saw on the map, they're quite new. Those universals as a nation didn't really exist in that way before, and that is also what you would find in the history book. But I thought it was weird, because how can it be that nations didn't exist before? How is that possible? And it defied a lot of things I read, like original text and so forth. They had like a very keen sense of belonging, and the universal seemed to have been in place already. And this is not hard to deconstruct now when I have the tool. Mid-19th century, we know, well, at least the history books knows, the idea of nationalism was firmly or fairly firmly established. It was a thing. It was something that was progressing, and new nations popped up. The Italian one is one example, and later the German one in 1871. Germany never ever been a thing before, but all of a sudden Germany develops in the hand of Bismarck himself and followers. But these nations are actually just the opposite. They are weaker nations, less of a nations than the old ones. The universal doesn't hold. Take Italy, for instance, just this ludicrous anecdotal thing that they used different devices to bring people together, like spaghetti. Spaghetti was consciously distributed as an idea all over Italy to put Italy together with a common food culture. Similar things happened in Germany when they often took the Bavarian or the Rheinpfalz culture to cover all of Germany. so that even up in the north, people who never wear lederhosen starting to use that as a garment. Neither of the both countries felt like proper nations in the First World War or the Second World War. Italy lacked unity, strength. Germany obviously shouted their way through the nationalism and never felt true. And I have always been on the line that what was lacking in Germany was nationalism, sense of pride and a sense of belonging, because it was all a construct, and the construct is not founded in this fractal universal. A fractal universal that only time itself can put together. I think I mentioned some of the lectures in Göteborgsgatan. I think his name was Simon Wiesenthal, something like that. Or, well, I'll find out the name. He wrote the book. He worked at a court. He was a notary. And he noted the difference when Hitler took over power, that it was a passivity, it was a lack of stamina, it was a lack of pride belonging to a nation that would have felt in normal cases Hitler to be something that shouldn't be, because Hitler was even more constructed than the nation of Germany. All these made up things. Conglomerate, a mishmash or a pyttipanna of different ideas, I would say in Swedish. That doesn't hold true, doesn't work. Doesn't work what we know how universals can come up. Well, the very same went for Italy. The previous nation, Italy, at least quite earlier on, had been quite successful, culturally advanced and so forth. The new construct Italy was nothing like successful. It sort of lost both world wars. It got away in the First World War. People noticed they were no good and they were bought out of their position and gained some few islands in the Greek archipelago, the Decunisian Islands. In the Second World War, it was even worse. The lack of actually fighting for a nation, that showed up in actual warfare. It's not unconnected. And not managing to attack Greece and winning over Greece, that is quite amazing. But it did happen. Well, for the so-called puppet dictator, or whatever you call them, or masquerade dictator, looked ridiculous in the eyes of the Allies, at least the French and the English. Shouting too much, showing up all that signs of lack of confidence we know to be the case. Parading in ludicrous uniforms and doing horrible things to other people, which is usually the case when you don't have that stamina, you don't have access to true knowledge. I think that's an excellent case. I think the whole history should be deconstructed, and this period, starting maybe in the Enlightenment time, going into French Revolution, should be deconstructed and said the decline of the nation state. That is more fitting what we actually know about history and the workings of universals. But on the other hand, it's also the point of the particular. And scary enough, it went even further. And that was the point of the conquest of abundance. It was a double movement. First you took away the particular or whitewashed it, and then you got this whitewashed, non-knowledgeable universal. And from that, you divided the universal like you would divide maybe a loaf of bread, taking a parable from the Bible. But here you just divide it. You don't get more bread. You divide it in 10 parts. And then you call those parts universals. So first case, you universalize, you whitewash, you take everything particular away. Actually, we end up with nothing, I would say. I think that Bertrand Russell idea, it doesn't hold true. And that thing that is nothing, that poor thing you divide once more, and now you construct from the universal the particular. You end up with nothing. It's just a placeholder. No wonder we need to have addendum today in linguistics, and I would say even in ordinary language, where you think somehow the world is divided in 2 parts: intention and extension, meaning and the actual word, and so forth. We need to have an extra to help with the perceived lack of meaning in the word. The word's not really functioning, maybe is a better thing to say. And this is, of course, something that ultimately comes both from the law of the excluded middle and the idea that contradictions can not be true. And this poses restrictions, and those restrictions have been going on under the cover, just under the radar, for such a long time that we indirectly, implicitly accept them, and we accept them, and also their effects, lack of knowledge. And in the end, it seems that we are talking from nothing. And of course, this deconstructor movement that Derrida does in the book is to regain some of the strength of the verbiage. Strengths that disappear both on the side of the writer, the author, the one who signs, like we heard from autobiography. The signing of the book is coming in the actual reading. But this is also a diminishing of wealth and value and abundance of meaning, particular, that disappears on the side of the subject, the one who reads it. So it's a double movement. The construction heals it both. I'd say we can go even further. We can sort of heal language itself. Maybe heal is not the apt word, but by showing these perceived limitations to having functions or doing things, some sort of things, we can put our intelligence to them, and when we do that, they do not put any force on things. They do not limit in the same way. We will not, however, criticize them. We will just reveal them, uncover them. I think uncover is the best word. Take them out into the open, cut the trees down. It sounds crude. I wasn't intended to say that. But make a clearing, make a Lichtung, look at the tendencies that's going on underneath. And when you see that, you will immediately understand, there will be no delay, that you will immediately start to make your universals better. Conglomerate of meanings, pointing in all directions. This is similar to poetry, and in poetry this rarely gets criticized. There was some crazy poet criticist at the literary institution in Gothenburg. I remember they took away all meaning, like sort of cut the meaning out of lyrics and books as well. But except for that, we usually accept that lyrics has this great meaning from the words meaning so many different things. My favorite is the haiku, "A pound jumps out of the pond and quacks." Even that one, and I think it's by haiku, No, it's by Basho, the famous Japanese poet. Got analyzed to death by one of these crazy teachers. Of course, influenced by this idea of universals and particulars. It has to be a particular frog, but that frog is coming from the universality of all frogs. And then you have a particular frog doing that. And you see here also another way of expressing the very same thing is a distancing. Because for every time you do this movement, first when you universalize, you step one step away from the depth of reality. You sort of retreat a bit. And then the second time when you construct a particular from the universal, however that can be done, it cannot be done I would say, you are even one step further away from being in the matter. You are no longer playing in the act. And this is the very movement of removing yourself from the thing. So you see, this is an actual thing one does. And it involves also getting out of balance, backing off. And to help heal that backing off, we turn this way, looking into the objects. And these objects we look into, they are actually cut out from the universal. And we don't see what we look at. And this, I think, clearly shows that the abundance that Paul Feyerabend tried to defend and defended can be defended even better. It can be defended by bringing down the universals in the old way and looking at in the new way. Because we need universals, and he doesn't go the full round. Well, at least not in the book, The Conquest of Abundance. It could be taken a step further, and it showed that it's a healthier way of having universals. Universals that are still alive, still playful with you, like you reading a book, and the author is still alive. It's not a dead author, and the text is not post-dissemination. It's not seminal anymore, not meaning anymore, not present anymore. It's not dead anymore. It's alive. And it becomes more and more alive with the more meaning you can get out of it. And there you have it. Both meaning and particulars coming from the great expanse of reality itself and its depth, which is not a pure line. All fractality is up and down, complex, interesting patterns, and this is also the reality we live in. It doesn't have Cartesian depth, it has real depth to it. And I think this is as good a point as ever to terminate this lecture. And I say thank you very much, and until next time I wish you a pleasant afternoon. Cheers!